Stop. Prince said it so quietly that Slash almost kept playing. The opening notes of Sweet Child O' Mine had barely left Slash's Les Paul when Prince lifted his eyes across the Madison Square Garden stage. 20,000 fans recognized the melody instantly. The arena exploded. People on their feet, fists in the air, voices crashing down from the upper decks. Then, Prince shook his head. "That's not what I asked you to play." Slash let the final note die beneath his fingers. The roar fractured into confused pockets of noise. He stared across the stage at Prince, dressed in purple, his own guitar hanging untouched against him. "You asked for Sweet Child O' Mine." Prince took one slow step closer. "I asked you to play it your way." For the first time, Slash's expression changed. Because everyone in that building knew what his way sounded like. They had spent years recognizing it within seconds. The Les Paul, the tone, that opening guitar figure. It was part of Slash now, or at least that was what 20,000 people believed. Prince looked toward Slash's hands. Forget the record. The arena grew strangely quiet. Forget Guns N' Roses. Forget what they came here expecting. Slash gave a short, disbelieving smile. "And what exactly am I supposed to play?" Prince's answer wiped the smile away. "Play it like you've never heard Slash play it." For several seconds, neither man moved. What had looked like a celebrity jam suddenly felt like something else entirely. Musicians at the edge of the stage stopped talking. Crew members turned toward them. Even the audience seemed to sense that the challenge had changed. Prince wasn't asking Slash to prove whether he could play guitar. He was asking something far more dangerous. Could Slash destroy the version of himself that made him famous and still sound like Slash? Then Prince turned toward the darkened side of the stage. A technician rolled something into the light. Slash looked at it, then back at Prince, and for the first time that night, he seemed genuinely uncertain, because Prince had prepared this long before Slash played his first note, and whatever was about to happen at Madison Square Garden had actually begun hours earlier, behind a closed backstage door. 4 hours earlier, Madison Square Garden had been almost empty. Road cases crowded the concrete corridors. Technicians moved beneath half-lit rigging, while amplifiers hummed through soundcheck. Outside, thousands of fans were already gathering. Backstage, Prince stood alone near the edge of the stage, watching 3 crew members arrange equipment that wasn't part of his normal setup. Someone mentioned Slash. Prince turned. What makes people know it's him? The question sounded simple. Nobody answered. The hat, one technician finally offered. Prince shook his head. The Les Paul? Another shake. Prince looked toward the empty seats. 3 notes, sometimes less. That was what interested him. Slash had reached the strange point in a musician's life where recognition could become both a triumph and a prison. Millions knew his tone. Millions knew how his hands attacked a guitar. And the opening of Sweet Child O' Mine had become so inseparable from him that Prince wondered whether Slash could escape it without disappearing himself. Hours later, Slash arrived expecting an unusual guest performance, nothing more. He walked through the backstage corridor with his Les Paul case nearby, sunglasses on, top hat in place. Prince greeted him warmly, but offered almost no explanation. Slash noticed several instruments positioned behind a curtain. "You starting another band tonight?" Prince smiled. "No." "Then what's all that?" "You'll understand." Slash studied him for a moment. Prince had a reputation for rearranging songs without warning, changing keys during rehearsals, and forcing musicians to listen instead of simply remembering. Slash knew enough not to dismiss the answer, but one instrument bothered him. It had been positioned separately from everything else. Slash stepped toward it. Prince quietly moved between him and the curtain. Not yet. Now Slash laughed. "What exactly did you invite me here for?" Prince looked at the guitar case. To see whether you still listen. 20 minutes before showtime, the sound of the crowd began penetrating the concrete walls. Prince was already walking toward the stage when he stopped beside Slash. One rule tonight. Slash waited. Whatever happens out there, don't play from memory. Slash frowned. How the hell am I supposed to play a song I already know without memory? Prince opened the curtain. The roar of Madison Square Garden poured through. He glanced back once. That, Prince said, is what I want to find out. Then he disappeared into the light. Now, under the white lights of Madison Square Garden, Slash finally understood what Prince had meant. The familiar opening of Sweet Child O' Mine was gone. Prince had stopped him before the song could settle into the version 20,000 people expected. For several seconds, Slash stood motionless, his left hand still wrapped around the neck of the Les Paul. Prince turned toward the band. Different key. A keyboard player struck a chord. Slash looked over immediately, slower. The drummer tapped out a pulse that barely resembled the driving rock feel Slash knew. Prince listened for 4 beats, then looked back at him. Now find your song. Slash gave him a look that said this was getting ridiculous. Still, he adjusted. His first phrase was sharp, bluesy, and unmistakably his. The crowd responded immediately. Prince didn't. Too easy. Slash stopped. Prince pointed toward the amplifier. The distortion disappeared. Suddenly the guitar sounded exposed, dry, clean, almost naked inside an arena built for volume. A murmur moved through the crowd. Slash played again. No wall of distortion, no familiar introduction, no arrangement to guide him. Every bend now hung in open space. This time Prince nodded slightly. Slash began building something new. He moved around the melody rather than through the famous riff, finding fragments that hinted at the song without revealing it completely. For a few seconds, it seemed he'd solved the problem. Then Prince raised his hand. Still memory. Slash stared at him. What do you want from me? Prince answered immediately. I want the song after you take Slash out of it. That landed differently. The crowd quieted. Slash looked down at the guitar that had been part of his identity for years. Prince wasn't challenging his speed. He wasn't asking for a better solo. He was stripping away every shortcut by which Slash could prove he was Slash. Then Prince looked toward stage left. The same technician from earlier appeared, and now the mysterious instrument was rolled completely into the light. Slash's eyes followed it. A battered, upright piano. The audience began reacting before Slash did. He looked at Prince, almost waiting for the punchline. Prince simply reached over and turned Slash's amplifier off. The tiny electrical hum vanished. 20,000 people suddenly had nothing to listen to but silence. Prince gestured toward the piano bench. Slash didn't move. Come on, Prince said. Slash glanced at his Les Paul, then at the piano, and finally back at Prince. Because now he understood the final part of the trap. Prince wasn't asking him to play Sweet Child O' Mine differently. He was asking Slash whether the song would still belong to him, after Prince took away everything the world recognized. For several seconds, Slash stayed exactly where he was. The piano waited 10 feet away. A few people in the crowd laughed, assuming Prince had made a joke. Slash looked toward them, then down at the Les Paul hanging against his body. He could have turned the amplifier back on. He could have played the riff everyone had paid to hear and brought Madison Square Garden to its feet in seconds. Instead, he unplugged the guitar. The laughter stopped. Slash slowly removed his top hat and placed it beside the amplifier. Then he rested the Les Paul against the stand. Prince said nothing. That silence mattered. If Prince told him what to play, Slash would simply be following instructions. The only way through the challenge was to find an answer Prince hadn't given him. Slash walked toward the piano and sat down. 20,000 people who had been screaming minutes earlier were now watching a guitarist sit in front of 88 keys. Slash placed his hands above them. Nothing happened. 5 seconds. 10. From somewhere high in the arena, someone shouted his name. Slash ignored it. Then he pressed a single chord. Simple, quiet, almost disappointingly ordinary. Prince tilted his head. Slash played another. There was no recognizable riff, no attempt to imitate the guitar on piano. He left empty space between the chords, listening to how each one disappeared into the arena. Then, Prince finally moved. He answered with one soft phrase on guitar. Slash looked up. Another piano chord. Prince answered again. Something had changed. They weren't performing at each other anymore. They were having a conversation that happened to use notes. Slash began reshaping the harmony beneath Sweet Child O' Mine, keeping the skeleton while removing almost everything familiar from its surface. Prince moved around him, adding fragments that seemed to ask questions rather than provide answers. The crowd became quieter with every exchange. Then a woman near the front suddenly covered her mouth. She recognized it. Not the riff, the song. A few rows behind her, someone began humming the melody. Another person joined, then another. Slash heard them. His hand stopped. The humming continued. A strange ripple moved through Madison Square Garden as thousands slowly realized what was happening. The most famous guitar phrase in the room had never been played, yet everyone could hear where it belonged. Slash looked across at Prince. For the first time all night, Prince smiled. Slash smiled back. The crowd erupted. It felt like victory. Slash had found the song without the distortion, without the Les Paul, without the arrangement that had followed him for years. He had answered Prince's challenge, or so everyone thought. Prince suddenly removed his guitar. He placed it carefully on its stand. The cheering faded again. Slash's smile disappeared. Prince walked toward the piano, but didn't sit down. Instead, he leaned close enough that only Slash could hear the first few words. Then he turned toward the audience. One more. 20,000 voices answered him. Prince looked back at Slash. You found the song without your guitar. A pause. Now make them hear the riff without anybody playing it. Slash stared at him. No guitar, no piano imitation, no band member secretly carrying the melody. The most recognizable part of the song had to remain completely absent. Prince stepped away. Slash slowly turned toward the crowd, and somewhere in that silence, his expression changed. Because he had just realized Prince had made one mistake. He had assumed the challenge belonged to the two musicians on stage. Slash had just figured out how to make all 20,000 people part of it. Slash turned back toward the piano, but he didn't touch a key. Instead, he looked at the drummer. One tap on the rim, then another. A pulse began moving through Madison Square Garden, slow enough to leave enormous spaces between the beats. Slash nodded toward the bassist. A low note entered beneath it. Nothing more. Prince watched from several feet away. Slash still hadn't touched his guitar. Then he faced the audience. The humming that had started moments earlier was still floating through scattered sections of the arena. Slash listened carefully, caught its shape, and played a piano chord underneath it. More voices joined. Prince's expression changed. He understood. Slash wasn't going to play the missing riff. He was going to make 20,000 people remember it for him. The drummer strengthened the pulse. The bass followed the harmony. Slash played around the melody, deliberately avoiding the notes everyone expected. Every empty space seemed to pull the famous guitar figure into people's minds more strongly. Soon, the humming spread from the floor to the upper decks. Thousands of voices were carrying the shape of a guitar line without a guitar playing it. Slash leaned back from the piano. For a moment, he simply listened. His most recognizable musical identity was coming back at him from 20,000 strangers. Prince had asked him to remove Slash from the song. Instead, Slash had discovered how deeply Slash was already inside everyone listening. Prince slowly began applauding. Not the audience. Slash. The arena exploded. Slash stood and walked back toward his Les Paul. He lifted it, plugged in, and the crowd braced for the riff at last. He never played it. Instead, Slash created a completely new counter-melody around the voices. Prince's smile vanished into concentration. He grabbed his guitar. One phrase from Slash, one answer from Prince. Slash pushed higher. Prince cut underneath him. Within seconds, the challenge had become something neither musician had rehearsed. The audience continued carrying the missing melody, while two guitars built an entirely different song around it. Then Slash suddenly stopped. He walked straight toward Prince. Prince leaned closer. Slash said something nobody else could hear. For the first time that night, Prince looked genuinely caught off guard. He glanced down at his guitar, then at Slash. Slash held out his hand. A long second passed. Prince finally understood what he wanted. Slowly, he removed the guitar strap from his shoulder. 20,000 people began roaring again as Prince placed his guitar into Slash's hands. But Slash didn't play it. Instead, he handed Prince the Les Paul. The arena erupted. The challenge had just reversed. Prince had spent the entire night asking whether Slash could escape the sound that made him famous. Now Slash looked at Prince and gave him the same problem. Your turn. Prince looked down at Slash's guitar, and suddenly, the man who had designed the test was the one being tested. Prince looked down at Slash's Les Paul. For the first time all night, the challenge belonged to him. Slash stood opposite him, holding Prince's guitar, waiting. The crowd understood enough to become restless. Prince had stripped away Slash's familiar sound, forced him onto a piano, and challenged him to rebuild his own song from nothing. Now Slash had taken away Prince's instrument. Prince adjusted the Les Paul against his body. Slash leaned closer. Play it my way. Prince smiled. Then he played one note. Not the famous opening, not an imitation of Slash. Just one bent note, held long enough for the arena to fall quiet. Slash answered on Prince's guitar. Prince responded. The exchange accelerated. Neither man tried to overpower the other. Slash left spaces Prince could enter. Prince twisted familiar harmony into unexpected shapes, and Slash pulled it back toward the song. The 20,000 voices that had carried the missing melody returned beneath them. Then Prince finally approached the opening figure everyone expected. He stopped one note short. Slash burst out laughing. So did Prince. The crowd exploded. That missing note said everything. Prince could have completed the riff. Instead, he left the space for Slash. Slash stepped forward and played it. One note. Madison Square Garden erupted harder than it had all night. When the final chord disappeared, Prince removed Slash's guitar carefully and handed it back. Slash returned Prince's. No victory speech followed. Neither man needed one. Backstage, minutes later, the noise of the arena still shook the corridor walls. Slash caught Prince before he disappeared into his dressing room. Tell me something. Prince stopped. Slash looked toward the stage they had just left. Did you know I'd figure it out? Prince stared at him for a moment. Then he gave an answer Slash clearly hadn't expected. No. Slash frowned. Prince smiled. That was the whole point. Slash waited for Prince to explain. Prince glanced toward the closed stage door, where 20,000 people were still making enough noise to shake the corridor. If I knew what you were going to play, he said, then you wouldn't have been playing. You'd have been following. Slash looked down at the Les Paul in his hands. That was when the challenge finally made sense. Prince had never asked whether Slash could play Sweet Child of Mine. Nobody inside Madison Square Garden needed proof of that. And he hadn't been trying to make Slash sound like Prince. He wanted to know what remained when the familiar version disappeared. The distortion had disappeared. The famous opening had disappeared. Even the Les Paul had disappeared for a while. And somehow, Slash had remained unmistakably Slash. But Prince had learned something too. The moment Slash placed that Les Paul in his hands, the teacher became the student. Neither musician could hide behind reputation anymore. They had to listen, react, and create something neither had planned. Slash gave a small nod. Prince turned toward his dressing room. "Next time," Slash called after him, "I choose the song." Prince stopped without turning around. "That's what worries me." Slash laughed. Years of music could make a few notes inseparable from a name. But that night, the greater test wasn't whether a legend could repeat the sound that made him famous. It was whether he could abandon it and still be himself. And maybe that was why 20,000 people remembered the silence as clearly as the music. Because the most powerful riff inside Madison Square Garden that night wasn't the one Slash played. It was the one he didn't.